Good day, Leaders of Valor. Thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Trin, and we talk about Leaders of Valor, leadership done the King's way on this podcast here on my station. So thank you for joining in. Those of you who are usual listeners to the podcast, we appreciate you, and those who are new to the podcast. Before we get started, we like to lead out saying, Holy Spirit, take over. We pray that you reach people right where they are so that they can hear exactly what you need to speak to them in this moment. So we pray that this session is a blessing to each and every one listening. Father, give us ears to hear and eyes to see what you need to tell us individually at this moment. Let us hear these words the way you need them to come across. Thank you for what you will do. So today I want to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart because I know a lot of people who are in my friend circle, who are in my family, are going through life's transitions. So I want to talk about how to successfully navigate those transitions. And one of the ways that I think is seen time and time again throughout the Bible, which is our ultimate roadmap on how to do well for ourselves and our families, I think one of the ways that God shows us that we must successfully navigate what's tormenting us is to make sure that we torment it back. So the title of this podcast is Torment What's Tormenting You. So what do I mean by that? Well, for instance, I know people who have lost loved ones, who have lost young kids, unfortunately. Those who are now going from being married to being single, divorced, a widow, widower. A lot of loss around us, and I know you and those around you have experienced it as well, regardless of our political affiliation, our background, our ethnicity, our education level, how many degrees we have on the wall, what our bank accounts look like. Loss, transition, suffering will come to each of us. And even just change, those transitions of life, going from being a mom or a dad who was always at the kids' games to now having those kids off and raising kids of their own, and we kind of lose our identity of what we've always known up until this point. Many of us have issues transitioning from those previous phases of life to where we are now. But I believe even in the transitions, even though they may not be what we want, nobody wants to experience a loss. Nobody wants to feel lonely. But I believe that God uses even those moments to help us see that, guess what? There's something else coming. There's the next best for you. Case in point, there are a lot of situations in the Bible, and if you don't have, many people don't walk around with a live Bible, but I believe that if you could have one in your office or your home, wherever, they're always good to go to. But I also have the YouVersion Bible app. Why do I have that? It's because YouVersion is mobile. Is something that you can take with you and use it whenever and wherever you need to, and I think it's phenomenal to have. I keep it on me. You can go to any uh, any Google Play Store or Apple or whatever and download the YouVersion Bible app. It's free to use. The Bible comes in various formats, so if you don't like the King James Version with thou shalt not, that's cool. I like New Living Translation. They have it there. If you speak Portuguese, they have a Bible for you. They have reading plans for you, whether you're going from being a mom in a house full of people to an empty nester. There are reading plans for now I'm lonely, now what? What's next for me? They have those topics. If you want to know how to successfully be a girl dad, they have those topics in the reading plan. And it's always backed with biblical knowledge. So I definitely promote YouVersion Bible app. They don't know I do it, but I promote it because I want you guys to have access to what I've used for probably the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years. And it brings me so much joy. If there's something that comes to me in the middle of my day, I can pick up my YouVersion Bible app, look for something that relates to that, and use that verse to lead and guide me. So I recommend you download YouVersion Bible app. But in the Bible, there are a lot of instances of people going through horrible transitions. One in particular that I resonate with, and I closely relate to, is Joseph. Not because my siblings hated me and sold me to slavery. They love me and I love them. But because there seems to be these periods of waiting in the dungeon. If you know anything about Joseph and his story, it begins, I believe, in Genesis 37 and goes through to the end of the book of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. So Genesis chapter 37, it starts telling you the story of Joseph and how God gave him all these visions of what would be in the future. Except Joseph was one of the youngest kids. And if you know anything about the society that was Middle Eastern society, the older kids were the ones who were blessed by the father, and they were the ones to get the birthright, and they were the ones that the other siblings had to pretty much bow down to and kneel down to. When the father passed on, it was the oldest son who was next in line, and they revered him as much as the father when that occurred. So Joseph was child number 11, and Joseph had this knack for constantly telling people, oh, I'm above you, I'm blessed, and da 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 da. And, you know, he was one of the last kids, even though he was the first child of Rachel, the wife. And that's a totally different story. It's just a lot going on in Genesis. Y'all got to read it. But his dad married, he had two concubines and two wives, Leah and Rachel. Leah, he married first. He was tricked into marrying. Rachel was the second, the one he really loved, and he worked 14 years for his father-in-law to get Rachel to be his wife. And the father-in-law tricked him, and Laban gave him Leah first instead of Rachel. He didn't love Leah as much, even though a lot of blessings came from her line of children, including Jesus, because Judah was Leah's child. But Rachel was a child, the wife he loved with all his heart. And Joseph was a child that was born to him in his old age, so he loved Joseph to no end, right? So God gave Joseph this special inclination to be able to have these dreams that ultimately became visions, but to also interpret dreams for others. So Joseph would have these dreams, and one of the dreams was he would tell his older brothers this, the ones who should succeed him and his dad in running the household and being the patriarchal lead once his dad passed on. But Joseph had this knack for going around, and he was a teenager, you know, and you know how we talk a lot. Joseph went around and he would tell his older brothers, who were all older than him and would be succeeding his father long before Joseph, supposedly. Joseph would tell his brothers, I had this dream, and my bundles of wheat stood tall, and your bundles all bent down and kind of paid homage to mine. So, of course, that made his brothers very angry. Who wants to hear from the younger sibling that I'm going to be above all of y'all and y'all are going to serve me one day? That was not the natural progression in that society. And I don't believe it still is. In many societies, usually the eldest child is the one who was revered and who was honored after the parents passed on. But Joseph told his siblings this, and they started hating him a lot. To the point where they sold him into slavery. They wanted to kill him, but they all decided, instead of killing him and having his blood on our hands, let's sell him to some traders who were coming through, the Midianites, another tribe that came from, they were ultimately their cousins. But they ultimately came through. They sold him to the Midianites, and Joseph was sold hundreds of miles away into slavery to work in Potiphar's house, who was the captain of Pharaoh's guard in Egypt. He was like second in line to the kingdom. So Joseph ended up working for Potiphar as a slave. Joseph went through a lot of things there in that place, in that dark, dark place. One of the things that occurred was Potiphar's wife, who was a cougar, y'all. She was something else. Potiphar's wife tried to come on to Joseph, but because of Joseph's integrity, he was not going to have sexual relations with Potiphar's wife because he saw it as a sin against God. He did not do it. Potiphar's wife lied on him. Joseph did nothing wrong, but Potiphar's life, as life sometimes plays out, he was punished because of a lie someone else told. He was thrown into prison, and in the prison, in the dungeon, in the darkest place in life, what did Joseph do? Even though I believe he still had some woe is me, and I can't believe I was trying to do everything right, and God, you showed me these visions of what would be. Why did I end up here in the lowest place possible? And it was of no wrongdoing of my own. I believe God still gave him the unction and the will to want to help others. So even though he was tormented by all this wrong that was going on around him, he began tormenting what tormented others. Joseph had two people in the dungeon with him, and I believe it was more than that. Ultimately, Joseph did such a great job running Potiphar's house, and that was noticed when he was thrown in the dungeon because of the lie Potiphar's wife said. When he was thrown into prison in this damp, dark, nasty, deep dungeon, Joseph was still doing his level best. So the prison guards saw that he was excellent in everything he did. They put him in charge of the prisoners. Imagine that. Because I would have been sulking, y'all, in the corner going, I ain't doing nothing, because of how things turned out. But Joseph had a different mentality, even in the midst of his hurt. He heard that some people in the dungeon, a baker and Pharaoh's former cupbearer, the person who had to test the wine or whatever the drink was before handing it to Pharaoh to make sure he wasn't getting poisoned, he heard they had dreams. So Joseph said, you know what, tell me your dream. I can interpret your dream. God has given me this gift and I want to use it to glorify him. He gives the interpretation. Even in the midst of him hurting, he gave back. He tormented what tormented him. His dreams he had previously, what was the torment for him turned into a victory for him. Why? Because he tormented this dream that the baker had and the dream that the cupbearer had, and he gave them the knowledge to know what was coming. He told them basically this is what's going to happen, and his predictions came to light. The cupbearer was restored to his position as Pharaoh's cupbearer, the wine taster, and the baker, as Joseph predicted through God in his dream, the baker saw that he was going to be killed. 3 days later, it came to pass. Both events happened just as Joseph, through God speaking through him, said it would. Joseph's one request was, remember me when you get out and go back to being the cupbearer for Pharaoh. Remember me and tell him of what I've done here so that I can continue to serve. Well, 2 years passed, and the cupbearer, of course, as most human beings do, they forgot who helped him out, right? Not anything uncommon. But he forgot who helped him out, and Pharaoh, all of a sudden, you know it wasn't all of a sudden, you know God put it in Pharaoh's mind as he slept. Pharaoh had a dream that God placed on him for this very reason. Pharaoh's astrologers and magicians and all of his seers and soothsayers, none of them could interpret what Pharaoh's dream meant. At that moment, the cupbearer remembered 2 whole years later, as the Bible says, 2 full years later, Joseph was forgotten for 2 years. But the cupbearer said, I am today reminded of my mistake. When I was in the dungeon, I had a dream, and Joseph, a Hebrew, interpreted my dream for me, and exactly what he said for me and the baker came to pass. He has the spirit of the living God in him. Pharaoh called for Joseph. They got Joseph cleaned up before he stood before Pharaoh. Joseph went in and interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and he told him from the jump, I don't interpret dreams, but God interprets dream, and this is what your dream meant. He told him what the dream meant, which basically was forecasting 7 years of plenty, great harvest for the land of Egypt, and then 7 years of famine. Got through all of the dream, fine. And then he said, this is what you need to do. Here's a plan. God had given Joseph all of this knowledge, and he said, here's what we need to do. You want to appoint somebody to oversee 1/5 of the grain that's taken from each year and put it under tight watch and lock, so that when the 7 years of plenty are over, we have 7 years that will sustain us in Egypt. Pharaoh said by chance, well, that's a great plan. Who can we put over all of this and have him run the duties? And he said, I don't think there's anybody better than this prisoner, Joseph, that we'd forgotten in the dungeon for 2 years. I can't think of anyone better. So let's make him second in line. I am the only one in the land of Egypt who holds more power than him. Basically, he made him second in line to his throne in Egypt. Imagine that, right? He was second in command to Pharaoh. He came from being sold from a slave, living in a dungeon that he was thrown in because of a lie Potiphar's wife told. And now he was second in command over not only Potiphar and his wife, but over everyone in Egypt other than Pharaoh. So he was taken from the lowest of the lowest and put almost to the highest of the highest positions he could have in Egypt. Why? Because he served. He tormented what was tormenting him. His dreams is what caused him to be in this place of being sold because he was hated by his brothers. But he flipped that around and served others with that same tormenting gift that he was given by God, the dreams that he'd been given and being able to interpret them. He was able to use them to propel himself forward, even though he had no clue that that would be the outcome. But there's a God in heaven who sees, right? So one of the things that I take from this lesson, and there are many other lessons just like this in the Bible, David, who went to serve Saul because the Lord sent a tormenting spirit to torment Saul, and he was, most scholars think he was schizophrenic, and he had delusions, and he was paranoid, schizophrenic, all this stuff. But I believe it's because of Saul's heart. God let it happen so that it could ultimately get David to be the second king of the nation of Israel at the time. The second king in all the history of Israel, right? So David was able to, he was so skilled in what he did. He was able to play the harp and other musical instruments, and it was the only thing that would calm King Saul. David was so skilled when he was taking care of the sheep and the goats and all the things that he shepherded over. When nobody knew his name, in a very lonely, secluded place, he was out taking care of his daddy's sheep and flocks. And he was able to kill a lion who tried to attack him, a bear who tried to attack him, with just a slingshot and rocks. Yet that was another thing that propelled him forward, because he used it to kill the giant that the whole Israelite army was afraid of, Goliath. But all of these things were put in place because he was able to torment what tormented him at one period in his life. And there were some lessons for us in that very thing. God is allowing us in this moment to experience certain things. It's not fun. It's not easy. I don't like it. Neither do you, I'm sure. But he's allowing us to torment what has tormented us. How does he do that? He puts people in our path who are going through similar situations. That's not by chance. There is no chance. It's divinely orchestrated that people who are now starting businesses are coming to me, or I happen to cross their path, right? It was divinely orchestrated so that I can now help them start their businesses. People who are single parents and you've been through it and you've done it, you were a single dad or a single mom and you raised your kids successfully, thank God. You can now help someone, maybe in your church, maybe in your place of business. Maybe you can be a mentor to them and help them get through it. If you're someone who has come from a low place financially and now you're getting on your feet, maybe that lesson was given to you so you could pass it on to others in the moment when they need it. I don't believe anything is lost to God. I believe he uses everything to benefit us and others. So in this moment, I have resolved that I want to torment what's tormenting me. If I'm worried about a contract coming through, I'll help somebody else get their contracts in order. If I'm worried about how a speaking engagement or a presentation will turn out, guess what I do? I help others who are having those same situations at this moment. And then it kind of takes all of the stress and anxiety off of me worrying about my little problem, and it focuses it on somebody else so that I can help them get through those tough times. I want to implore you to do the same. Maybe there's somebody who's going through the transition of being married to divorced and you've been through it. Use what you know to help them get through. Be a support, be an ear for them. Maybe you're transitioning from high school to college and you have little siblings or cousins behind you who will be doing the same. Teach them what you know, how to do it successfully. Let them learn from some of the mistakes you made and also some of the lessons learned along the way. If you are an executive and you're thinking about transitioning and you're at the point where you're about to retire and you're like, I don't know what to do next, mentor somebody who's sitting in the same place that you were at one point in your career. Show them. Don't just leave the organization, say now what, and sit at home and go to your own devices and be like, I don't know what to do. No, you always have work to do. You're still pertinent. Teach somebody else how to be successful in business. That way the lessons are no longer losses. They are truly life's transition success gems. Use them to your benefit as we continue to move through this life. Just like Joseph did, just like David did. I want us to do the same. During life's transitions, torment was tormenting you, and it may actually lead to your elevation. And that's what I think God is teaching us in this moment. I want to remind you to remember to live for purpose, in purpose, on purpose, and with purpose. If you need to talk to anybody about some of the things you're going through, you never know who God's putting in your way, who can help you navigate life successfully. We're all going through something. The election alone is something that has caused a lot of stress and anxiety. Talk to those in your circle. Seek out people you can help and people who can be an ear for you as well. And I guarantee it would help you get through these transitions. Remember to torment what's tormenting you, and that will help propel you forward. Be blessed.